wish you an enormous welcome to this afternoon's launch of the Independent Commission on the College of the Future. My name's Ian Diamond, and it's been my enormous pleasure to chair this commission, and this afternoon is a really special day. It's a special day for many, many reasons, but as I shall say in a moment, not least because of the critical importance and ever increasing importance of the subject that we have addressed in this commission. Before I say a few words both about the commission and also thank a few people, and then move to our keynote address from Sonia Sodha, who we are delighted and very privileged to have with us, can I just say that all attendees will have their cameras turned off and mics muted throughout the webinar. What that means is, and we are all on the panel committed to moving forward with clarity and brevity so that there's plenty of time for questions. But so if you'd like to ask a question, please do, but do it via the chat function. The other thing I would note is that this webinar this afternoon is being recorded and will be available on the website. So having said that, let's just start by saying we're at a moment in time, particularly following the dreadful pandemic that we have been and still continue to experience, where the need to upskill and to continue to reskill across our population has never been greater. And one of the key areas that this happens in any community is in the college sector. And colleges, we would argue, are at the heart of their communities and a way in which all members of society can touch the sector in order to gain the skills they need to re-engage with the employment market, to earn more, and to build the new society and economy that we will want in our country as we move from this pandemic. Within the Commission, we've thought an enormous amount and received an enormous amount of information across a set of key themes. Lifelong learning has been two words that have been at the heart of everything that we do. Everyone should have the opportunity to touch education throughout their lives. We are in a world now where people are likely to have more than one career. I suspect it will be very, very rare for people to be with the same employer in the same career for the whole of their lives. So in moving between careers in one's working life, then clearly changing skills will be necessary. Technology means that new skills will be essential to society. And so lifelong learning doesn't become, if you like, a term that is an option. Lifelong learning is at the heart of everything we will want to be as a society. Secondly, we need to really build on our strategic relationships between education, the college sector, and employers and society. Civil society, employers, and the college sector must work together in order to develop curricula and courses and opportunities that are fit and ready for the new world in which we will move. And that's going to be absolutely central to the way we think. And finally, we absolutely need a really joined up approach across all of education. There needs to be seamless movement between schools, colleges and universities, not competition. We believe very strongly, and I've believed for a long time, that college education should become, if you like, one of the real choice things that I was about to say young people, but people, young and old, choose to do as they choose their options for their education. And we thought hard about how this will be achieved. We thought hard, critically, for this commission by working hard across the 4 nations. And it has been a real privilege to have a 4 nations approach, recognizing the diversity and the heterogeneity between the 4 nations, but therefore being able to draw on best practice and make decisions and opportunities that come with that. I think it's worth just reflecting a little bit on how we will know if the vision that we have for the college sector in the future is the right one. Well, in the future, we would submit that if we have success, employers will see their local college working with other colleges in a kind of regional way. They'll see their local colleges as key sources of strategic support. They will know that they input into the curriculum, but they receive from the curriculum. And as Audrey Cumberford and Paul Little so brilliantly put in their piece in Scotland, that the opportunities to use colleges as partners in innovation is incredibly important. On the other hand, people of all ages will see their local college as a place of learning and as support, and as a central part of the community. As we move to improve the social cohesion right across our country, then colleges will be a key source of that, a touch point for people. And people, but one of the ways in which that will happen is through brilliant and engaged workforces. And we say a lot in the report about the workforce in colleges, and we want a situation where people really believe they are working in a fantastic sector where remuneration is fair and where development opportunities are exciting. And as I've indicated before, finally, parents, guardians, families will aspire for their children to attend college as an equally prestigious route as university. That's where we have got to in our conversations with so many people. And I'd just like to now, if I may, just say a few thank yous. A few thank yous, firstly, to some of our key partners, the Association of Colleges, City and Guilds, Colleges Scotland, Colleges Wales, FETL, JISC, NOCN, NCFE, and finally Pearson's. An enormous set of partners who have engaged, but at the same time recognise that this is an independent commission, and our report is very much our own. I also want to say thank you finally to the hundreds, probably thousands of people who've attended the over 100 events that we've held over the last few years to gain input. This has not been, contrary to public rumour, a report that the Commission have gone into a darkened room, put cold towels on their head and come out with. This is a report that has been the result of much consultation, of listening, of hearing, of looking at international comparisons, and of developing something that we believe will be a siren for the future work in this area. I'm going to stop now and thank you all again for coming. And we've now got a series of presentations. Firstly, a really exciting keynote address, and then we'll have some presentations from the panel members and then some discussion. So it's an enormous privilege for me to welcome Sonia Sodha, who's a chief leader, as everyone will know, chief leader writer for the Observer and the Guardian. Sonia, it is so good of you. I know how busy you are to have found the time to speak to us this afternoon, and I will do no more than thank you again and invite you to say a few words.
Thanks so much, Ian. And actually, on the contrary, my thanks are to you, to the Commission and to the AOC for hosting this event today. Because I think, as you said, Ian, this is a really, really important time for the college and the FE sector. So it's great to be here and be part of the conversation. So I'm a journalist. I've been at the Observer for about 5 years. But before that, my history is working in policy and politics. I've worked for think tanks and charities that work with children and young people. So I guess I've been thinking about and writing about education policy for well over a decade now, sort of for the last 15 years. And I'm sure many of you will feel like this. Sometimes it feels like we have the same old debates again and again, with politicians turning out the same old phrases about how we want parity of esteem between academic and vocational education, equal parity between the university and the college sector, which is great. But quite often these terms get talked about in the political arena, and this is not a sort of party political point. I think this is true of both governments of late. Both parties of late, but we very rarely see the kind of concrete action that would actually lead to a parity of esteem. So it's really great to be part of a debate and part of the launch of a report, which actually I think sets out some really good practical steps for how we might start to make some of that a reality. And I think hopefully we will have a very good conversation about that today. This will all be very familiar territory to you, I'm sure, but I just wanted to very briefly recap what the issues are with the way that we do post-16 and tertiary education in this country, because I think although there's some stuff we really get right as a country, there is also a lot of stuff that could be improved upon. And, you know, that's all stuff that Ian's already touched on, but we've got this sort of, we've for a very long time had this emphasis that going to university is the best or even really the only way to continue your education after finishing school. And we've also got this sort of twin emphasis on the idea that continuing your education is kind of like a one-shot chance. You're either in it and you do it at the right time, or you've kind of missed the boat. And I think so many aspects of our post-16 education system are just designed around these two principles that have kind of more been smuggled in as a result of path dependency, rather than anyone at one point just sit down and think, yes, this is how I think our education system would work. So first of all, I just want to say on the university point, and I think a common misperception in England is that since we've had tuition fees of over £9,000 a year introduced, you know, young people are sort of on their own after age 18, and they pick up the tab themselves, and there aren't sort of deep inequities in that sense between young people who go to university and young people who pursue other routes for their learning. And actually, I think that's a bit of a myth that needs blowing out of the water. Tuition fees or no tuition fees, because of the way the system works, the state still ends up subsidising the education of young people who go to university to the tune, you know, average tune of well over £20,000. Now, of course, there's no problem with that. That's, you know, a good thing. We want to be investing in our young people. But it is very, very striking when you set that against the levels of investment in young people who don't go to university. We spend very little on young people who don't go to university as a rule in general, compared to young people who go to university. And, you know, I've been writing about this gap for the last few years. To me, it's absolutely outrageous that we hugely invest in young people who go to university, and we do so little for young people who don't go, and students who don't go to university. And I just think that we should take a step back and imagine what the reaction would be if we did that pre-16. Can you imagine if we sorted our pre-16-year-olds by academic ability, which we often know functions, the way we measure academic ability often functions as a bit of a proxy for social class, and invest hugely more into 10-year-olds who've already had a head start in life? We would be outraged, quite rightly. I think we should feel the same level of outrage that those inequalities exist in the post-16 education system. And then I think we also have this very weird linear concept of learning in this country, where there is just this assumption that you do it all before you start working, which is completely bonkers in my view. I'm sure lots of people have had this experience, but some of the learning that I've done after entering the labour market full-time and leaving full-time education has been the most profoundly important to me. Lots of people are in that situation, yet we kind of still have this sort of perception, and as a result, it's kind of the way our system works, which is that if you don't do it in this order, kind of doesn't count, or you kind of haven't been successful in some way. So I think it's really, I think that's my sort of broad brush characterization of some of the issues in the system. I think those issues are related to some big problems for us as a country. I think I've already said there are massive inequalities in the opportunities that we offer young people and adults, but that is it just cannot be said enough, in my view. I think it's related to low levels of productivity in the UK that we spend ages talking about, particularly outside of London. We know there are big skills gaps that can't just be filled by undergraduate degrees in the university sector alone. Obviously, they're an important part, but they're not the whole solution. And I think the way we do post-16 education is also related to the fact that we have such a large low pay, low skill, in inverted commas, sector in the UK. There are just too many jobs out there that are deemed to be low skill. Actually, some of them are incredibly skilled. If you look at care work, for example, caring for people with advanced dementia, incredibly skilled work. It's just that some of the skills that are involved are skills that we think of as feminine skills like care and communication. So I think, you know, we've got that issue in our labour market where we have this conception of what low skill work is, which is wrong, and we don't give people the opportunity in what we deem low skill work to advance and to improve their skills. And as Ian's already said, there are just way too few opportunities for people to retrain or reskill or switch career, even as our economy is undergoing some massive transformations. And the result of that is, if you are middle class, if you've got resources, if you can afford to retrain and switch, might be tough, but you can do it. But if you are stuck in low paid work, you just do not have the money to pay to send yourself to a training course to retrain up front. So I think that, you know, that there are these whole sets of issues in the system, and I think they've all become a lot more urgent in the context of a global pandemic that has triggered a deep recession and is accentuating inequalities. And I'm sure lots of you will feel the same way, but it feels really horrible to watch what's going on right now, because it feels like economically and socially we're watching the beginnings of a replay of the 1980s all over again in slow motion. We know the ending of this story, and yet no one is taking the action needed to create a different ending, which is entirely within our grasp. And I think that there are going to be profound implications of the pandemic and the way that it is being managed for the North-South divide. I think some areas of the country are going to be much harder hit in terms of job losses than others. I think we know job losses are going to be large scale, and they are disproportionately going to impact on young people as well. And I think despite being 8 months into this pandemic, for me, this is a government that has done very, very little thinking about how to deal with the long-term consequences of this pandemic. And I think there's a huge difference in the quality of the response if you look at the very, very short-term emergency measures like the building of the Nightingale hospitals, the furlough scheme. Obviously, some of the short-term stuff has been dreadful as well, like track and trace. But you know, when you look at the sort of long-term efforts and the long-term response, it's really, really underwhelming, whether it's the provision for children who are out of school for months. You know, why weren't structured activities put on over the summer, for example? Whether it is just the lack of thought that's gone into young people in youth and employment, and the completely underwhelming response from government on that. It just does not meet the scale of the task, as Gordon Brown has written for us at The Observer. And there's also just been too little thought. I mean, we've had some stuff from government on reskilling or retraining, but there really is no sense of urgency there. And there's no sense of ambition, I think, for the long term. So, you know, we've all watched this film before. We know what happens. We know that young people are going to be hardest hit. We know that they will experience the impacts of a poor start in the labour market for the rest of their careers, for the rest of their working lives. we know that when you lose your job and you go on to benefits and there aren't jobs there immediately and unemployment benefits are incredibly low, you know, next April after universal credit, £20 a week boost is taken away, they will be at the lowest level that they've been since 1990. We know how this story goes. It traps families into multi-generational poverty and worklessness. And if you're living on very low benefits, when you've lost your job, when you're thinking about how to keep your home, your car, how to keep your sanity, how to keep the show on the road, you are really not in a position to be thinking about retraining and reskilling and what jobs may be there for you later down the line. And if you're a child living in that household where your mum and dad are struggling to put food on the table, that's going to affect your education. So I really think that there is a lack of thinking here about the long term and what you do. And that's where I think this report comes in. And there's a couple of really important ideas in there that I hope the government will take up. I love the idea of a statutory right to lifelong learning and a skills guarantee for a post-COVID economy. I think both of those things would go some way to address some of the issues that I've been talking about. But I also think if we're really serious about parity of esteem between the college sector and the university sector, between vocational and educational, academic routes rather, excuse me, I do think there are just certain things you've got to have, like parity of funding, as I've already talked about. All young people should get the same thing post-18, and adults should have access to a lifelong pot of money for their learning. But I also think actually we have to take a big step back and think about the way that our university system and higher education is structured, because one of the reasons why we have this very elitist view of post-16 education in this country is a lot to do with the way that the university system is structured because of path dependency. And I've written about this recently. We have this incredibly academically stratified university system where literally if you get AAA or BBB, that determines which university you go to. You know, it can determine the future course of your life. And it's all based on this kind of rather strange idea that young people who get AAA and BBB in their A-levels or BBB and CCC shouldn't be learning alongside each other. And I'm not quite sure that that assumption stands up or that it's a valid one. And yet it does create an education system, I think, which perpetuates privilege, inequality, because we know that A-level results are so much a reflection of social background as well as kind of innate ability. So I think we need to ask some tough questions about that system, and I certainly don't have all the answers, but I think unless we ask some questions about the system that, you know, nearly half of 18-year-olds go into and why it is so stratified, we're not going to tackle some of these broader parity of esteem issues that exist more broadly in the post-16 education system. So hopefully that is some food for thought and discussion there.
Sonia, thank you very much, and thank you for that. And to remind everyone, this is a Four Nations report. And we've now got some representatives from different parts. I'm going to say a few words about the report and some of the key elements for them from our panelists. So the first panelist is Peter Cheese. Peter is the Chief Executive of CIPD and has made an enormous contribution to much of our thinking. So Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you very much, Sonia. It's a real pleasure to be able to be part of this launch, and it was a real pleasure to be a commissioner on this review. I come from the world of business, and the professional institute I run, the CIPD, is the professional body for HR and people development. So it's a very, very core question for our profession about skills, access to skills, development of skills, and so on. And as Sonia's laid out, I mean, I think we have come into this report in a context where it has never been more important that we address some fundamental challenges about skills provision and about balance across our educational system. And those have been very, very big questions for us as commissioners throughout this report. If one reflects on one or two points, first of all, that many surveys have shown that most businesses say that they suffer from a lack of skills. There was an Open University report last year that indicated 66%, two-thirds of organizations said that they were suffering from a lack of skills, and that 3 in 5 business leaders as a result of that said that was hindering their ability to execute strategy and to be agile. So these are fundamental business questions. And what we have seen also, sadly, and Sonia touched on this, is an underinvestment in business, and I'm particularly pointing at business, this one, underinvestment in the workplace in skills development. Now, hence, as we look ahead and recognize that the future is going to demand even more that we upskill and reskill. A recent CBI report based on McKinsey data published last week estimated that 9 out of 10 workers in the next decade would need upskilling and reskilling. Now, that might sound a bit alarming to some, but the reality is actually this points also to this point of lifelong learning, that we all need to keep our skills current, and that we haven't been doing enough for that, both in the workplace, but also crucially working with the educational system. And FE has this very, very particular part of the educational system, which is of such value to employers. First of all, FE is very, very focused on vocational and job-related skills. And the good FE colleges have always worked with employers in helping to plug those skills gaps and helping employers to develop the kinds of capabilities in their workforces that they need. And a big focus and a big recommendation from the report was to strengthen those links, to create these employer hubs where employers are working closely with FE colleges in their local communities to help develop the skills that they need, building apprenticeships, building all of these other schemes which are proving of great value to employers, yet still we're not making enough progress on. So employer hubs really, really essential, and therefore strengthening the connection between FE and employers, not just at the point of entry, but right through the development of skills in the workplace. Secondly, I touched on already this notion of community. So many businesses, I mean, we sometimes talk about skills mobility. The real reality of most workforces, not just in this country, is that particularly, or maybe to put it in a different way, unless you really are at the high skills end and you can kind of take your skills and travel, for the most part, people want to know that they can get employment in the areas in which they live. And it would be a travesty if we suggested that somehow we should all be traveling around just to find the jobs that sustain us for our lives. So the notion that FE is so connected to community, to building community skills and working with employers in those communities is vital. And that's what employers are looking for as well, knowing that wherever they are located, they can recruit the skills that they need in their localities. And that is also, incidentally, I believe, an important part of what a responsible business is. It recruits its people from the communities in which it exists, and it recruits those people inclusively. In other words, all the different demographics of our workforces and all the skills that we need. So the final point that I'd also make is an important one as well, that we have focused a great deal on technical skills and very job-specific skills. Those are important, and FE, of course, can play its part in that. But there are also essential and core skills which we all need. And it's been interesting to me in the dialogue in recent years with many employers and many HR professionals that so many employers have been talking about the idea of, well, I need to recruit on attitude and aptitude, and then I will develop the job skills that I need in the workplace. And if we ever believed as employers that we could recruit what I sometimes describe as oven-ready employees straight out of the educational system, we can't. We've got to work with education to build those skills in the workplace, as I said. But the idea of essential skills is it is those very human skills, those skills of empathy, of teamwork, of collaboration, of communication. And those are skills that should be deeply embedded in education everywhere, and that we then have a more of a common language and ways in which we can frame those and help to understand between individuals, education, and employers about what those skills are. And I profoundly believe that FE does build those skills well, because it is focused on a lot of its employability ideas, and these are essential employability skills. So, as I said, in the report, there are many very core recommendations that particularly call out this idea of connection with employers, working closely with them, lifelong learning in a context. And it's not to say that all education is always just about employment, but this connection to employers in localities, in communities, working together with FE is such a vital part of this whole system, and a very, very vital part of the recommendations coming from this report. And as I said, I'm delighted to be part of this and to support its growth. all the different ideas around funding, the development of the workforce itself with an FE, they're all there in the report, and some very powerful recommendations which I commend us all to help to take forwards. So thank you, Ian, and let me hand back to you.
Peter, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. And now we move on to Smita Jamdar. Smita is the Head of Education at Shakespeare Martineau. And Smita, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. So reading the report, I was really struck by the fact that so many of the challenges that the country faces can be met by colleges. And Sonia articulated them brilliantly. They're not new challenges, but they have been massively accelerated by COVID, and they will be compounded by Brexit. So what I wanted to do is just pick out two of the recommendations that I think are really important if we're going to be able to help colleges fulfill the role that they can in fixing these problems. And they're recommendation 1, which is this idea of a long-term plan and a strategy for skills and education, and recommendation 9, which is about having simplified oversight. And I wanted to make just 3 observations about why I think those recommendations are particularly important. So the first thing is, I think that the report, and indeed any of the commissions I've sat on that have looked at skills recently, they've all sort of recognised that competition can achieve many good things, but collaboration in the time that we find ourselves is much more likely to give us the answers we need. So we definitely need to find ways to make sure that colleges can work effectively with each other, with universities, schools and private providers, so that they can ensure the best outcomes for learners, for regional economies and for wider communities. Now, I think what's key there is that the role that each institution plays in collaborations should be driven by the benefits that they can achieve for those beneficiary groups and not by where they sit in the skills architecture. So that's going to really involve some honest and selfless soul searching on the part of the institutions involved to think about what their role in a collaboration network should be. Now, secondly, collaboration of this sort is really only possible if there is a long-term strategy and a stable and long-term policy and funding environment. And the reason I say that is because the absence of those things necessarily drives quite short-term and defensive practices. You know, it can mean that people are all chasing the same pot of money or chasing the same learners and the same employers. World economies that get this right tend to make changes quite infrequently, as opposed to the very rapid changes that we see to how policy and funding, etc., is administered in the UK. And so the third point then was that if we're going to have that stable and long-term policy and funding environment, that really depends very heavily on trust. And it also depends quite heavily on recognising the importance of having autonomous institutions. So we need to see trust between government and the institutions. We need to see trust between colleges and other colleges, and between colleges and universities and other parts of the skills system. And I think autonomy is really important because ultimately neither government nor any regulatory or funding body has a monopoly on good ideas. It's much better to have empowered, strong colleges who operate within a clear strategy and funding framework in partnership with other local institutions to meet the priorities that Sonia so articulately set out. Thank you.
Smita, thank you very much. And I saw in the chat a number of people really backing up what you were saying. So thank you very much. Now the next panelist to speak is going to be Paul Nowak, who's been a commissioner who's really contributed a lot also. Paul is the Deputy General Secretary of the TUC. And Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks for the opportunity to say a few words, and more importantly, to have been part of the Commission over the last 18 months. And I want to thank the Commission for the engagement you've also had with our affiliated unions, unions working right across the college sector. I think it's commonplace, isn't it, when we have report launches like this, we always say that the report is timely or it comes at a critical time, but this report really does come at a critical time. I mean, we know the next few months are going to be really challenging for employers and employees alike. The government has got to make the right decisions, but we also need a national collective effort, unions, employers, colleges, a whole range of social partners working together if we're going to stave off that threat of mass unemployment that Sonia talked about before. But I think colleges have got a key role to play in helping to meet that challenge, but also in all the other challenges that we know we face in our economy and society as well. We've got Brexit Brexit and the impact that that will have on our labour market and the economy, the need to decarbonise our economy and what that will mean in terms of people's skills and challenges for employers. The need to get to grips with automation and digitalisation and to make those work for working people as well. And I think this report sets out how colleges can be at the heart of addressing those key challenges. Maybe to pull out two sets of recommendations, I think, Ian, which are important for me. The first of the set of recommendations on 4 and 5 about that statutory right to lifelong learning and the skills guarantee, something that unions have been calling for a long time, helping people to retrain, to reskill, to refocus the work that they do right throughout their working lives. And I think colleges have got an absolutely key role to help people meet that aspiration. It won't happen by accident, and I think the report talks about the sorts of things that need to happen to make that right to lifelong learning a reality. It means giving people access to resources, so an equal footing for maintenance support, whether you're in college or university, for example, getting our social security system right so it doesn't penalise people who take time out to retrain and to reskill. But it also means that we are giving people the right support and advice as well. And I'm really pleased to see the report mention the need, for example, for there to be practical support for careers advice and guidance in colleges. I mean, this is sort of work the TUC and our unions are very familiar with. We've got a track record of working with local colleges and employers to help meet collective and individual skills needs. We've got a big track record in supporting people into education who've maybe had a bad experience of education the first time round. And again, I think colleges have got a lot to boast about in that regard as well. I should just maybe mention in that our ability to do this work is potentially being hindered by the fact the government announced it wants to cut the funding to Union Learn, which is at the moment supports 240,000 people a year to access learning and skills in union-led projects working with employers on skills. That's a decision I hope the government will reverse, because it actually cuts across the collaborative approach that's outlined and headlined in this report, and which is so important. My final just set of focus, Ian, is on that recommendation 10, which is about setting out an ambitious workforce strategy for the people who work in our colleges. I'm really putting staff and the people who work in colleges at the heart of the strategy. And I think it's summed up in that line in the report, which is the best people fully empowered. And what does that look like in practice? Well, first of all, I think it means a workforce that's valued and rewarded in terms of pay, but also valued and rewarded in the contribution that they make, the investment in their skills and their professional development. I think it means thinking about the college workforce in the round. I mentioned before, not just teaching staff and lecturers, but the people who provide support, the people who provide careers advice and guidance, absolutely important. But I think it also means that the staff having a say in the strategic direction of their institutions and the sector as a whole. And that's why I'm pleased to see the report talking about the need for a social partnership approach. It's going to look different in each of the 4 nations, but I think underpinning that those different approaches should be the principle that staff have got a key role to play in setting the direction for the sector and making sure colleges are fit for purpose in 2030 and beyond. Maybe just finish my remarks, Ian, because on behalf of the TUC, you always thank the workers, but to thank Lewis and Philippa and David and all the others who've been providing support to the project. I think they've put in an immense effort, and they have genuinely been collaborative, listened to the contributions from unions and others, and I think that's reflected in the quality of the report. Thanks a lot, Ian.
Cool, thank you very much, and we'll be back, I'm sure, in part of the discussion to hear some more from you. But in the meantime, I'm going to go to the last of our panelists and the last, if you like, input in before we move to a discussion. And it's an enormous pleasure to introduce Marie-Thérèse McGivern, who was formerly the CEO at Belfast Met College, where we had one of our really, really good meetings to listen, as Paul was just saying, to colleagues in that case right across Northern Ireland. So Marie-Thérèse, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Ian. And it has been an absolute enormous pleasure to be a commissioner and to be part of this process. And I echo Paul's thanks to Lewis and Philippa and the rest of the team who've been so wonderful to us the whole way through. I mean, I just think the report is so rich in ideas and so full of ambition for what we believed FE could be. And I think it also created, for the first time, certainly in my experience, a really fundamental UK-wide conversation, which I hope continues where we looked at the best in each of the parts of the UK and synthesized that, I think, into a report which is leading, I hope, to a new reinvigorated sector that can realize its own potential. As a kind of former college leader, there are two areas where I was particularly, I mean, I love all the recommendations, but there were two in particular where I felt as a college leader, as a former one, these were ones which really kind of sang to my heart. I mean, the first one was that concept of a networked college, and Peter talked very much about the links that needed to be built with business. And I think that was one of our big themes, was the need to create very strong and robust alignment between colleges and employers and economic development in their localities. And it's really, really crucial, I think, that we see colleges become key partners in local economic development ecosystems, so that they can provide the training and the preparation for the workforce that is based on their own deep knowledge of techniques, of systems and of trends, and a deep knowledge of what the local economy needs. And also a new partnership which is lifelong with students. I think it also means, in terms of that networks, that we bring about a better collaboration. And you know, we talked there about there has been a culture maybe more of competition in the training and education sector rather than collaboration. And again, I think the report is seeking to create collaborative and complementary networks where we see more specialization in colleges, less generalist approaches, and we recognize those specialisms. The second area which I just really did sing to my heart was the concept in recommendation 3 of the anchor institution. The fact that we believe passionately that colleges should seek to be at the heart of placemaking. And I think the report sets out a new direction that cuts through the lack of clarity and the misunderstanding which are so often associated with colleges, and instead has a vision for colleges which has a significant role in placemaking and therefore transforming lives. And I think what we're trying to do is seek to have colleges leverage their position and power, which they haven't always done very well, allowing themselves not just to get into the room where decisions are made, but to own the room and to demonstrate how they own that room. In my own case, and in my own college, we took a very hard decision to locate what was to be our cutting edge innovation centre on a peace line in West Belfast. That was a contentious and a very difficult decision. And what happened was that we made a very bold statement on 2 lines. One, what we said to those local communities who were living in difficulty and divided, that they were good enough to have this Keynote building built in the middle of their community. But what it also did was create a space where other institutions could then locate as well in those, therefore regenerating a very difficult part. That process earned us the ability to get into the rooms where decisions were made in Belfast and to be recognised that we had a place in place. And I think the very best of FE does that and demonstrates it all the time. So as Paul said, we all talk about this is the time. This is the time. And, you know, maybe COVID has been a desperate thing, but maybe COVID gives us some wind to our sails in going forward. And what we need now is for FE to grasp it. So thank you. And it's been brilliant to be part of the process.
Marie-Thérèse, thank you very, very much. And now we've got a number of questions that have been asked. I will also be keeping an eye on the chat if people want to ask questions in there. But my first question, and look, I've got the first question, and it's not simply because Marie-Thérèse has just spoken, because it's a question from Damien Duffy, who's the Director of Development at Belfast Met College, who asks the panel, what can we do to better align the interventions to support skills and employability to be give us a better result in terms of economic recovery? I'm going to start with Peter, and if other members of the panel could just put their hands up if they want to come in, I will bring them in. Peter, would you like to kick off? How do we
Thanks, Ian. I mean, a very, very cool question. It sort of links to this idea of a more coherent overall skills strategy and a policy strategy, which we have struggled with over many, many decades in this country. And of course, it it's got to come from both sides in the sense of, first of all, a clearer rhetoric, I suppose, from business about the kinds of skills that we need. And if I'm honest, I don't think we've been coherent enough as businesses often in the past about what are the kinds of skills we're going to need. And today, of course, there's a lot of debate about things like digital skills and other skills of that nature, quite specialist skills, and we can define some of those things. But as I've said, I think we've also got to focus on some of these core and transferable skills as well. So I think one of the key recommendations, which Sonia, I emphasize, this idea of getting employers together more with their local colleges so that you can talk about it in a much more collective way and a localized way. So I think we've got to take this idea of trying to get policy more aligned at the most strategic levels of government and at the nation level, but then have that conversation really working for us as employers and as FE college leaders at the local level about what skills we can see now, what we can see in the coming years, and make those two things work together.
It's really helpful. Paul, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I mean, I think that this is a classic case in the need for more joined up government. I mean, joined up government in Westminster and joined up government between Westminster and the government in the nations as well. I mean, if I just think about the range of initiatives, some of which, I think are welcome from the Westminster government, whether it's the industrial strategy refresh, the Kickstarter scheme to get young people into work, the announcement that we saw on level 3 skills before. I mean, what we seem to have is announcement from department to department with nobody joining this stuff up in the middle. And one of the things the TUC's called for is for governments, in the face of COVID-19, to set up a national recovery council, employers, unions, colleges, governments working together to think this stuff through and to make sure policies support each other rather than compete against each other, and that there is some of that coherence centrally. I mentioned before the cut to union learn, and it's obviously something I feel very passionately about, Ian, but that comes at a time when the Prime Minister is keen to give people a level 3 entitlement and get people without qualifications access to skills. I mean, the two decisions just don't stack up. So more coherence. And I think somebody said it on the panel before, government doesn't have all the answers. And I think the experience of the last 6 or 7 months, whether it's the job retention scheme would be a good example, the value of bringing employers and unions together, of sitting down and mapping out a joint way forward, it can't be overstated, in my opinion.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to move on to the next question, which comes from Carol Stott, who's the Chair of Governors at Bath College, who asks whether the Commission has a view on the necessary steps to address articulation and progression across different parts of the system. And I wondered, Marie-Thérèse, whether you had a view on that, or Smita in a second. Marie-Thérèse, you're on mute.
Sorry, on mute. So I think we are a long way, as Carol's suggesting, we're a long way from trying to align those systems. We have a long way to go, but we have opportunities now and conversations happening, I think, at different paces in the different nations. And that was one of the issues that we came across regularly. But I think what happens and what is helpful is that if we are seeing progress in some parts of the UK, then we can use that as examples and exemplars to push and nudge the process in other parts. And I think that's kind of, for me, that cross discussion and that cross conversation about what each of us is doing and being able to demonstrate from an evidential base that certain things do work. We can get things kickstarted. We can introduce things in other places. Well, let's try this as a pilot because it's working in Scotland, or it's working in Wales, or it's working in parts of England, or it's working in Northern Ireland. And I think that was the richness of the report. And as you said earlier, Ian, it wasn't just the final 11 recommendations, but it's all the work that went in. And we have, as a commission, published a number of other reports, and we will continue to do specific reports on the 4 areas in due course over the next couple of months.
Great, thank you, Marie-Thérèse. Smita, did you have a view?
Just actually to endorse that point about learning from each other, because there are some really, really good pockets of things that are being tried around the country, and it's always a bit sad that we don't have a mechanism for sharing it. But I think the Commission has given us that opportunity, and we should seize it and learn and adapt obviously always within the regional context, but there are things that are working in parts of the country and we should just embrace those.
I think this whole point that it's a 4 nations process is so important, you know, because there is so much best practice kicking around, and I think it really is important that we seize it and work together to do the best for all our learners. There's a couple of questions that have come up in the chat, and I've also got one from Louise Rowland, which are kind of aligned. And I'm going to come to you, Sonia, first on this. And it's, you know, what do you think about the role of digital technology will be in the college of the future? You know, we've talked about, I think absolutely rightly, colleges being at the heart of their communities, but, you know, without taking it too far to the point, with digital technology, the role of community may change a bit. And I wondered, Sonia, if you had a view.
Sure. So, I mean, I think on that point, I mean, there's got to be sort of more of a role for kind of digital technology in connecting us. And, you know, perhaps the pandemic sort of provides an opportunity to think about how it can be used more kind of in the context of colleges and how college education is delivered. But I think one thing actually that the pandemic has taught us is, you know, when you're learning, digital can never replace, you know, being in a room with people. So I personally think it's possible to put too much emphasis on that stuff, but I do think it has a really important role to play. And it's very interesting. I mean, I know less about how it's being used in colleges, but for example, you know, I know friends who've got kids in schools where actually, even though schools are back, they're still making use of digital resources, for example, for children to put homework in through Google Classroom and get comments back, even though they are in school. So, you know, that stuff has got potential. But for me, the main takeaway of the pandemic is, you know, you can't recreate being in the room physically with people.
Sonia, thank you. Peter, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to add a couple of thoughts. I think in many ways, learning and education is going to change and needs to change. We've got to find these blended ways of working. And whilst I agree with Sonia, of course, you know, physical connection, human connection is part of how we learn. But you know, modern techniques now with digital learning, you can create collaboration online as well. We've got to find better ways of delivering more bite-sized learning, which might add up into qualifications. I mean, Paul's point earlier about, you know, employers worrying about time away from work. Well, you can deliver learning in lots of different ways. And I think this will be a really important agenda right across the educational system, as to how do we really take advantage of some of the new ways in which we can learn through digital, creating more flexibility in how we learn, more agility in how we learn, and better learning outcomes. And that will be a challenge for the sector, as it is for business as well, because we're going to have to retrain and upskill also how we create learning content and learning delivery in different ways. And that will be a workforce challenge as well.
And I just think it's worth, I'll abuse the chair by just saying that content is difficult to produce well because it's a different pedagogy, and we need to just recognise that very, very much. Paul, I'm going to allow you a quick note on this one, if I may, because I do want to get through one further question before we finish.
I'll be very brief, Ian, but just to say in summary, I don't think there is any contradiction between us being able to deliver more programmes online and in a blended way, and colleges still being at the heart of their local communities. And we've seen this with trade union education programs that we deliver through local colleges. That program's gone almost entirely online in the last 6 or 7 months, but I know that reps still value the support from colleagues physically working in those centres as well. It's not going to, again, happen by accident, though. I think this is, the report points out the need to invest in the skills of the college workforce to be able to deliver programs online and in a blended way, and to support people to do that as well. I mean, I think we have to think about the mental health and well-being of staff who are going to be under an incredible amount of pressure. As you said, it's a different way of delivering education, and I think all too often it's seen as a cheap and easy way of delivering education. Actually, if you do online right, it's not just about, you know, efficiencies of scale. It is you need to invest in the systems and into the staff to make it work well.
Great, thanks. And my last question, I've got a last question that we're going to look at, and it's from Deirdre Hughes, and asks about careers advice, something that I think is incredibly important. And Deirdre asks, you know, looking ahead, what role should colleges perform in local communities as a provider of impartial careers support for young people and adults? Can FE colleges be truly impartial in the careers information and advice and guidance they give to individuals? Marie-Thérèse, can they?
Yes, they absolutely can be. In fact, they're probably the most neutral place to gain information in any part of the education system. And you know, we're grappling in Northern Ireland with this, where you know it's gone into schools, it's gone into a kind of quasi-government service. But what we need is impartial advice that looks at what is best for the young people. And you know, I believe, certainly in my experience in FE is a place that is prepared to give young people all sorts of advice. I mean, in my college, we sent people into apprenticeships, we sent them into higher level apprenticeships, we sent them to university, we sent them directly into jobs. In that context, I believe we were a neutral broker, because what was at the bottom was, how can we get this person a pathway to work? And I think that's what great FE does. So I do believe we can be that impartial broker.
Thank you very much, Marie-Thérèse. Smita and Sonia and Paul, and can you all keep your remarks to 30 seconds, because time is flying. Smita.
Yeah, it goes back to the importance of having a collaborative approach, because once you're collaborating, there's no reason why you can't be impartial. You don't gain anything by keeping learners who shouldn't be with you. You gain everything by the trust you build by referring people where they should be.
Superb, thank you. Sonia.
I was just going to say, I think this question is really pertinent given the questionnaire that we've all seen and probably done on the government website about giving future careers advice. And I think it really raises the question, what is proper, rich, wise advice, and how can young people get it? And I think just as important as a sort of lifelong approach to learning is a lifelong approach to advice in some ways, because this idea that a 16-year-old at one point or an 18-year-old at one point can just sort of download all this magic advice and it's going to transform the rest of their life, that is just not how young people and we as people even work. So I think the question of what a lifelong advice service looks like is important too.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Paul, the final word.
2 points here. And one, I think it's just really important that we respect the role of those who are providing careers advice and guidance. I mean, sometimes it's seen as an option, you know, someone does it on top of their day job. Actually, I mean, really investing in the people who are delivering this advice and guidance is important. But secondly, crucial for me, for the people that we represent, it's not just about young people leaving school or college or university. It's important that they get the right careers advice. Where does the 26 or 27-year-old who's been doing 2 or 3 dead-end jobs go for genuine, proper support, advice and guidance? At the moment, we tend to wait until people are unemployed for 6 months before we give them intensive support and careers advice. And I think colleges could absolutely play a really important role here, trusted in their local communities, working with others, including Job Centre Plus and all the rest of it. But it's got to be a key part of the offer from local colleges.
Paul, thank you very much. Peter, I'm going to give you 15 seconds. 15
seconds, yeah, just a real quick one. I mean, I absolutely agree with everything that's been said. Lifelong coaching and support in jobs is going to be important. We're talking about a life of jobs now, and it's all going to change. So we need that. I agree that FE plays a vital role and can be independent, but it does need the support of business and business people. Things like the Careers and Enterprise Company, which I've seen referenced, is a very good channel to help bring business people to work with the colleges and with the careers advice support teams to give that advice to their students. And it is a very important collaborative effort for all of us, I think.
Peter, thank you very much. That's brilliant. And thank you to Deirdre for a question which brought all 5 panelists to life in such an exciting way. And this brings me close to the end. I'd like to do a few things. Firstly, to reiterate the fact that it has been a 4 nations commission, and it has been a privilege to work with the governments of all 4 nations who have engaged absolutely fully in this. And I know that we will be following up this report with shorter nation-specific reports and continuing to engage with the governments right across our 4 nations to really hopefully take forward those recommendations within the national context. Could I just also say something that has come from all the speakers today, and which I think we're all passionate about. The moment is right, but the time needs urgent action. You know, we will be doing everything, the team will be working doing everything they can to push for that urgent action, but the moment is absolutely now in this dreadful pandemic to really make sure that we reskill and upskill our population ready for future challenges. Could I just absolutely thank you all for coming, but I just wanted to very quickly finish with just a few thanks. Thanks to our 5 speakers, brilliant provocations and brilliant discussions afterwards. But also, very, very finally, thanks do go to a few people who've already been mentioned, but I think it's important to mention. David Cragg was at the heart of thinking through the initial part of this and has been with us throughout the journey. David Hughes has really driven the change, but as has been mentioned before, Lewis Cooper and Philippa Allway have been geniuses in both maintaining pace, maintaining patience with the commissioners as we move through, and ensuring that we have the product that I think we are all incredibly proud of. And so finally, can I urge you all to continue to be involved as we move forward, because if we take this forward in the way we hope, this is a challenge for our entire nation, which will make our entire nation, I believe, a better place. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and thank you for all your help and interventions. Thank you very much.